Hello, everyone. As the inaugural director of the Elahé Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto, I welcome you to the Institute's Iranian Study book launch featuring Rouzbeh Akhbari and Felix Kalmenson's recently published book, If, If, If Need. Very beautiful. Before introducing Rouzbeh Akhbari and Felix, I would like to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Hiran Bandat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral home. I would like to express our gratitude to the sponsors of today's book launch, the Canadian Society for Iranian and Persian Studies, the Iranian Studies Students Forum, and the Roshan Cultural Heritage Foundation, which has generously funded the establishment of the Elahé Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies. My distinguished colleague, Professor Matthew Farris, will, of the Department of Geography and Planning, will introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, I'm Matt Farish from the Department of Geography and Planning. Honored to be here with you in two respects. The first is as a guest and as a student. This is my first time here, so thank you very much for having me and for organizing and hosting, especially to Mohammed, who I've come to know a little bit through our collaboration with Rouzbeh, and so here's to new collaborations and connections. And the second reason is that I've had lots of conversations with Rouzbeh about his doctoral work. But this is an opportunity to cross into another intersecting, overlapping dimension of his life, which is namely his art, and particularly his collaboration with Felix. So, hello, Felix. Very nice to meet you virtually, finally. I will let Rouzbeh introduce the collaboration, Pejvak, and specific book project. I will just say that Rouzbeh is an award-winning PhD student in geography here at U of T, working on, we were discussing this earlier today, informal geographies of two border zones of the international north-south transit corridor, one in Azerbaijan and one in Oman. And also that the long-term collaboration that's at the root of this book has resulted in many international exhibits and film screenings, residencies and research fellowships, articles and book chapters. So it's wonderful to be here to celebrate this book with you, to hear more about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tamaki and Dr. Parrish. It's really an honor for us to have the launch within the framework of the Institute, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'll introduce Pejvak briefly, and Felix will take over, and the rest of the plan for the afternoon is some listening sessions and readings from the book, and then we can all gather and look at the book together. Pejvak is a long-term collaboration between Felix and myself since 2014. For our multivalent, intuitive approach to research and living, we often find ourselves in convergence and entanglement with like-minded collaborators, histories, and various geographies. I'm an artist and human geographer working in video installation and film. My practice is research-driven and usually exists at the intersections of political economy, critical architecture, and planning. Felix is also an artist and filmmaker whose practice navigates installation, film, and performance. Felix's work variably narrates the liminal space of the researchers and artists' encounter with landscape and archive. They live predominantly in Tbilisi, but they're joining us today from Innsbruck in Austria. Felix.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for having us. I wish I could have been there with everyone. I'm here in Austria on a fellowship, so it's great that I can appear to you virtually. So before getting into today's reading and listening session, I would like to spend a few moments acknowledging everyone who made this project possible. Besides the incredible authors that we will get to shortly, this book is the result of a prolonged labor of love by many. Sorry if I'm reading, it's just there's a lot of people to acknowledge, so we had to write it down. First and foremost, our graphic designer, Rudy Guj, and Timur Akhmetov, who put up with us for the past 2 years as we patiently gathered the materials that culminated in this book. Our research assistants, Dina Cheragvand and Hamid Gezlu, and Lisa Vetkova, played an important role in the direction of the research that the research took over the couple of years. Our master illuminator, Moshtaba Abu Talebi, is from in Isfahan, graced us with his kindness and brilliant generational skills in visual storytelling. And our calligrapher, Javad Azari, turned Farjad Tavakoli's typed up words into captivating lines that flowed like melting glaciers. With the kind support of Will Pollard, our editor and proofreader, as well as the printer P.B. Tisk and our publisher Building Fictions, this book would not be here with you today. Our special thanks go to Zenia Benevolsky, Bahar Mudiri, Mahboube Merbani, Roya Marandi, Jesse Bass, Rian Jepen, forget how to say her name, Piet Schnooks, I'm bad at pronouncing Dutch names, I'm sorry, Renee Gillis, Emily McKibben, Ron Bernstein, Romy Fink, Paul John, Bruno Alves de Almeida, and Jan van Eyck Academy, who hosted us in the research and production phase of our exhibition in 2021. We are also thankful to the National Archives of Iran's paramilitary library in Tehran, the Botany Department of the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, and the Photo Archives, which are housed at the McLaren Art Center in Barrie, for providing the archival images that we work with in this book. And of course, last but not least, we are grateful to the Canada Council for the Arts, without whose support none of this would have been possible. I'm going to turn it back to you, Rouzbeh. Thank you, everyone.
This book unfolds in the liminal space of imagined threats and post-disaster solutions. While planetary in scope, its chapters adopt a particularist and constellational approach, allowing the grand narratives of water management in Central and West Asia to be read in parallel with microhistories. Emerging from If Need Be, our 2021 exhibition curated by Tim Roehrig at Z33 in Hasselt, this volume brings together a body of speculative narratives and archival documents that follow historical, contemporary, and fictional characters whose lives directly or indirectly come into contact with various modes of resource access or control. With an emphasis on microhistories and the ways in which they mobilize grander narratives, If Need Be acts much like a holy landscape, a landscape with holes, whereby the reader falls through the story's fissures into the chthonic and esoteric. Combining our own research and writing with commissioned chapters by Masoud Borbor, who wrote The Wind Traveler, Dina Cheragvand, who penned as Abul Qasim Lahouti, Farshad Tavakkoli, the poet behind The Memories of a Dry House, Anissa Sabiri, the author of The Bluebirds of Pajalu, Irakli Kolbaiya and Benjamin Filler, who embodied the archival voices of Nicholas Roehrig and Henry Wallace, and last but not least, Sasha Shestakova and Anna Engelhardt, who contributed their conspiracy-producing Telegram bot. This trilingual publication seeks to create a space in which serpentine and often violent histories can be revisited by way of critical tabulation. Drawing from the traditions of history from below, anti-colonial historiography, and speculative fiction, we take the past not as a homogeneous and continuous terrain, one in which contemporary storytellers might shake hands with the subjects of history, but as a fragmented space haunted by a cacophony of imbricating voices, gossips, and imaginaries. Resisting the trope of the isolated historian, or historical geographer for that matter, who builds a privileged vantage point from which to interpret past events, we offer the metaphor of the communal chai khana, or the tea house, as a site of imaginative historiography. The chai khana is a cross-cultural place of osmosis, where living and spectral forces interact through the exchange of information, gossips, and stories, directly recounted or eavesdropped in fragments. Giving equal weight to gossip, legend, and historical facts, the authors of the following book, our dear comrades and collaborators, take the position of unreliable narrators, piecing together the struggle for water within the struggle for the historical record. Tracing interconnections between contemporary resource disputes in West and Central Asia along a broad set of trans-historical geopolitical flashpoints, including the ancient water conflicts of Zabul, the Iranian constitutional revolution, the so-called Great Game with its labyrinthine counterintelligence operations, and the anti-desertification agenda pursued by the USA under President Franklin Roosevelt, the first sections of this book look at the complex psychological, literary, and performative dimensions that these struggles engender. The last two chapters provide an anchor in the present, offering embodied and critical reflections on the current conjuncture of myth-making and propaganda as part and parcel of continued colonial projects and their residues within these regions. So before we continue, we're going to have a listening session and a poetry reading session from the book. The music that we will hear was composed by Bahar Modiri, and the poem is by Farshad Karagboli. So we'll have a listen, I'll read something, and we'll listen again.
من آزاده‌ای بودم زیبا، چشم در راه شوی، و شوی بازارگان راه سند بود و عور که دیگر نیامد، و 1000 بار روز آمد که او نیامد، و 1000 بار روز آمد که قله به خانه خدایان بردم و او نیامد، و به همه‌شان گفتم به مردوک بزرگ، به عرا، به ایشتر، گفتم که تنهایم با طفل، گفتم که تنهاییم بی مرد، و زمین گفتم بی مرد کنجت نمی دهد، و خدایان جز به زبان بوی کندر و چشم‌های پرخواهش کاهنان پاسخ ندادند.
Soaring winds and flooding rains and burning sun, alas, pushed Hirmand to the east. Hamun shrank to the north, and the lake fled the city. Fewer willow trunks did we find. Cane brakes grew ever thinner, streams petrified. Between the farmer and his farm was now miles of way to cross, miles of dry land cracked like the stones we shattered. And the mill was lost in the horizon. I pulverized the stone and forged iron, all the while the price of wine, bread, and duck became 3 months of my labor. Fish was now a dream. Travelers from south told us stories of wealth, and we sent off our young, praying to the gods of sun and water. Until the day that there rose to the skies cries of sickness. Fire died in our furnaces. Death spread its wings on our households. Songs of fishermen disappeared. We stared hopelessly to the sky, our mouths cracked by thirst, like our lands and the jumping goat, now only images on jars. This was 4,000 years past, those days when the city withdrew to silence. We sought solution, even though patience was a silent lullaby of hope, and hope was endowed with the sense of memory of man's nature, and only bloomed in dreams. We gathered our efforts like the millennia before, since contending ourselves with patience would itself kill hope in silence. It was need, haste, and our requisites determining what we carried along. We took our home to no man's land. We traveled far, day and night. We traveled in the day and rested at night. We traveled at night and burned in the day. Our journey was but an escape. Escape was to again make again. We knew if we reclined, we would decline. And it was in our hopeful escape that songs of patience and stories of abundance became our comfort. Around the fire at night, there was talk of south. I was a shepherd, and my herd was our food, so long as there was a herd. And there came the day when the green of the south appeared before our eyes. Bird calls filled our ears, springs began to flow, and children were no longer stillborn, but well alive. We followed the springs and traced streams until we reached the Indus. This was 1 millennia past, times of the Green Valley.
اینک ای خویش، ای قبیله منتشر 7000 ساله گم، اینک کدام مقصد سبزتر از صلای صبح برای هرچه همت همراه در جبر و جلدی و احتیاج. خوشا شب رفتن و روز تفتن، اینک که رفتن حتی گریختن نیست. ای قبیله منتشر 7000 ساله گم، همه ورای مدار جهان و میان مدار خون.
Sorry about that.
تشنه کرده اید ورای مدار جهان و میان مدار خون. تشنه ای های ای هزاره ها که از ما دریغانه در می نوردید بر ما، و های ای همه دستور نبشته های سنگین دروغ که اینک سنگ ها را نیز تشنه کرده اید. ما تشنه ایم. خوشا فرات بخشنده مردوک، ای قبیله منتشر 7000 ساله گم.
O Euphrates, forgive us once more. Now I and he, that Indusian man with those iron-worn hands, the free woman and the slave, Marduk and Ishtar worshipper, desperate, we are separate. With a 7,000-year family dispersed as far as the Mediterranean, from Transoxiana to Mesopotamia, from Sodia and Isfara and Firgana and Batken to Tartus and Damascus and Sinai. And yet, beyond the order and orbit of universe, we are caught in the order and orbit of blood. We are thirsty. O you millennia passing by and by our forgetfulness, O you stone-inscribed rules of lies, you even dried out the stone. We are thirsty. Alas, the giving Euphrates of Marduk, even if you, our Euphrates, were no real judge, you were still 1,000 times more forgiving than these Babylonians. Alas, taking our home with us to deserts. Alas, those night travels. Alas, those days burnt under the sun. And now to go is not even to flee. And now no longer could patience be the silent song of creation. And no longer will it bloom in dreams. Now the only verdant promising destination would be a destination of peace. And now my soul, my dispersed 7,000-year lost family, this drought is our last ship run aground. So thank you for listening. Now we're going to have a short discussion of some of the characters, historical and contemporary, that are relevant to this book. The book, as you will see, is extremely eclectic. I wasn't supposed to do that. The book has many characters that come together, and their entanglement kind of creates the narrative flow. But one character that came to our attention and is quite interesting was Amir Kabir Hamedani. He's an occultist, a Muslim preacher born in Hamadan, Iran, that also became a traveler. And as part of his preaching, he went to Ladakh and Kashmir region and created a lot of literary and occult works written in that geography. One part of a legend that is attributed to him and was very central to our imagination of this project altogether was that apparently he invented this practice of artificial glacier grafting, which involves putting salt and small quantities of water in shadows inside a valley or inside of caves in order to encourage the creation of ice sheets that later become massive glaciers. It sounds very sublime. It's quite imaginative the way this story goes. But one aspect that was really fascinating to us was that apparently the Mongolian horde that was kind of overtaking all of Eurasia at the moment was stopped in Ladakh because of a glacier that this guy and his pupil ended up grafting 70 years earlier. So in one of these miniatures, the one on the right, you can see an army that is clearly stranded on a sheet of ice, unable to make their way to the Iranian plateau from Mongolia. These illuminations are done by Mojtaba Abu Talebi, someone that we worked with. So the legend is very oral. We came across this in multiple accounts, but we kind of turned them into these fabulations that end up form one aspect of the book. Another character that was very important to how some of these narratives around water struggles manifest in the region was Abul Qasim al-Lahuti. So Lahuti was a poet. I don't know why the slides are doing this, but so Lahuti was a poet and a revolutionary, and he fled Iran shortly after the constitutional revolution through the city of Tabriz and the Aras border zone. He became quite famous in the Soviet Union as a poet. He was always longing for the Persian language, so eventually he moved to Dushanbe, to Tajikistan. But on the way through that journey, he also befriended Stalin, and he became very close to him. And because of that, he was kind of presented in multiple contexts as like the expert on Persian historiography and literature. What stood out for us is that around the time of Operation Ajax, when Mossadegh was ousted through a CIA-led coup in Iran, there was this brief kind of moment when the CIA believed that if the Soviet Union was to take over Iran, he would be a really good kind of ideal candidate to run the Iranian SSR. So they created a psychological operation against him, which involved publishing a fake autobiography attributed to Lahuti and then presenting it in all the bookstores in Tehran and elsewhere. And that created a huge moment of kind of diplomatic and political tension between the Soviet Union and the Iranian government at the time. Because, first of all, Stalin was not very happy about this. He called him back from Dushanbe and he was like, why did you write this biography? And he says, I didn't write it. So there was this moment when he had to prove that he was not the author behind this autobiography. The book has 2 chapters dedicated to these events. Some of the original archives that are kind of communique around this event are here. And we also attributed kind of our own biography to Lahuti by commissioning Dina Chiragwan to write as Lahuti, as a poet who's, a poet of, people's poet that was commissioned to go and write about dam building in Tajikistan. So there's a fictional chapter that is essentially the 3rd autobiography attributed to Lahuti in 2021.
So here we have Trumpism before Trump.
Absolutely. Yes. This is, post-truth before any of this. I will give the floor to Felix now to speak about Roerich and Henry Wallace.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Sorry, at some point I brought my computer down because I'm looking at you on another screen, and maybe you were looking at my teacup.
That's right. It looked good.
It looked good. Sorry. Hi again. I'm not well versed in the Zooms. Yeah, as Rouzbeh was mentioning, the book and the exhibition is haunted by all of these characters who are the inception of the work for us, our encounter with these characters. And a big portion, as Rouzbeh was kind of mentioning in our work as artists, is finding characters who have these gaps in their archive, either deliberate gaps or places where fictioning had already occurred, where we intervene as unreliable narrators to speculate on those gaps. So in this case, right, there was this fictitious autobiography. So Dina wrote a lost chapter from the real autobiography. So there's these places where we kind of insert let's say wedges of critical fabulation and speculation on the archive. So one of the characters who was at the inception of the work for us was Nicholas Roerich, who was a painter and a mystic from the turn of the century, the last one, who was quite famous. I mean, he's still very famous in Russia as a painter. I'm not sure if he's as well known in North America or in Iran, but I mean, I think he's like the highest selling painter in Russia, like in terms of how much a painting goes for. So he's a very well-respected painter. But at the time of the Soviet Revolution, he left Russia, and he has a very circuitous kind of history. So we can't map it all in this 15 minutes we're going to talk about. But the parts that we included in the book, which is kind of consistent with our logic throughout the text, is this moment where there's like an intersection of ecological crisis, myth, speculation, espionage, and yeah. So I'll just expand on that a little bit. So at some point, needless to say, at some point he ends up in America, and Roerich started his own brand of theosophy. If people are familiar with theosophy, I see some heads shaking. So theosophy is kind of a blend of Eastern religious practices with let's say, a pseudoscience. It was a way of reconciling science and religion in this kind of crisis around the turn of the century. So he developed this set of ideas called Rerichism, quite similar to theosophy, and he ends up gaining quite a huge following in America, including among his followers is Theodore Roosevelt's mother, and a man named Henry Wallace, who at the time was the head of the Department of Agriculture under Roosevelt. Henry Wallace later actually became the vice president under Roosevelt. And during his tenure as the head of the Department of Agriculture, he was overseeing large-scale rehabilitation efforts to remediate wide swathes of the American Great Plains following the Dust Bowl. So the Dust Bowl, if most people are familiar with, is a period of prolonged drought and there's desertification of this American heartland, the grain-producing heartland of America. As I said, partly due to drought, but also to mechanization of agriculture and over-exploitation of the land. So because Roerich had the ear of this Henry Wallace, who was this kind of typical kind of New Deal liberal man, right? This one who believed in the idea of the new man, you know, this who bridged, let's say, ideas of like early Western encounters with Eastern philosophies, with environmentalism and technology and science. Roerich came to Wallace and he said, listen, I have actually an amazing solution to this desertification problem that you have. I have traveled extensively in Mongolia and I have witnessed a landscape which is very similar to the one in the Great Plains, where there are drought-resistant grasses that can stabilize the soils. So why doesn't the Department of Agriculture, with congressional aid, finance a botanical expedition to Mongolia and Japanese-occupied Manchuria, Manpuku, to collect samples which can then be brought to the botanical societies in America and propagated to stabilize the soil. So that's one face of Roerich, right? And that's the one that Wallace presented to the Congress and actually got congressional approval and financing for, including Roosevelt's explicit approval. In the book compiles sorted documents from around sorted through 900 personal letters of Henry Wallace from his archive, along with speculation, which I'll get to later. So part of this expedition is this botanical expedition. But then Roerich always has 2 or 3 other versions of the kinds of things he wants to undertake. So Roerich had an ongoing plan to develop what he called the Sacred Union of the East. So the Sacred Union of the East is based around Buddhist eschatology around Shambhala and the idea of this kind of the end of times. And specifically this moment where a prophet kind of appears and wages a war against the forces of darkness. So he has, in various moments in history, kind of presented himself as this prophet and presented the times, which were these revolutionary times, Japanese occupation of China, the Russian Civil War, as this kind of end of times. So part of his other project was developing what was a pan-Buddhist commonwealth called the Sacred Union of the East, which he proposed as, let's say, an American-backed power within these borderland regions between Russia and China, in Central Asia, Mongolia, of course, installing himself as the theological head of state. So part of this botanical expedition or the entire botanical expedition is sponsored by the Congress. But while he's going on this expedition, his son and some other friends of his from the White Army are kind of collecting samples alongside two American botanists who were brought along when they realized that they weren't very good at actually doing it. His son was just like into herbal medicines. He wasn't a botanist. And it's actually through the correspondences of these American botanists that you can really start understanding the other perspective of what was happening during this expedition. So Roerich, as they were traveling, would visit the lamasseries and have his autobiography printed in these lamasseries and distributed to the people. And he would walk around with this letter from Roosevelt, which is in the book, actually, reproduced in the book, saying, I am a representative of the most powerful state in the world, and I am here to bring this kind of end of times, or this to bring about Shambhala. So he was engaged in both activities at the same time, while of course as Roerich is always tentacular, he was also scheming to he was continually scheming to overthrow the Soviet Union. So his son and a lot of his accomplices were former White Army soldiers and high-ranking officials. And at some point in this expedition, they started marching towards the border of the Soviet Union with arms that they purchased with this congressional money. And it's at that point that, so you have to understand Japanese-occupied Manchuria at the time. You had Japanese spies, Chinese spies, Russian spies, British spies. This place was teeming with espionage. And everyone was watching this man going around with a small militia of Cossacks traveling from lamasery to lamasery, proclaiming himself to be a prophet, with a letter of Roosevelt. So at some point, let's say the jig is up and the whole thing kind of collapsed. But what was really fascinating is that you could really chart this whole expedition from all of its angles with the archival evidence and except for a very important and key form of documentation, which was the so-called My Guru letters. So the My Guru letters were direct correspondences between Roerich and Wallace, in which he referred to him, I forget the word for this when you refer in the address at the opening of the letter, as my guru. And what ended up happening is when this whole scandal came out and it hit the papers that Roerich was a spy and a double agent, they tried to bury the whole thing because it was very embarrassing for the Congress, of course, and for the president. And especially when Wallace went to run for vice president, they deliberately burnt all of these so-called My Guru letters. One or two of them managed to survive the fire, and they were published alongside the smear campaign against him. But he still managed to take the position of vice president. So in the book, we have the documents that weren't burned between Roerich and Wallace, the documents from the American botanists, and then also correspondences between Wallace and various diplomatic channels that were part of another campaign of Roerich's, which we don't have time to get into. So as part of kind of our work as artists, we invited the Georgian poet Irakli Kulbai and the American poet Ben Filler to inhabit Roerich and Wallace, and to insert them, to rewrite the My Guru letters. So they both extensively studied the archival documents, which I curated. So I curated a series of documents that kind of tell the story, let's say like an archival detective story. And then there's moments where these my guru letters were inserted in between them. So I mean, you can read it for yourself, of course, but they're remarkable, luminous letters. Kolbai has studied Rerich and Theosophy and the esoteric for over a few decades. So for him, it was a natural fit, and same with Ben Filler. So they corresponded also through email, not through snail mail, and those formed the correspondences. So you'll find it in the book as my guru letters. They also this chapter of the botanical expedition made it into the exhibition as well, from the samples that were actually collected by the American botanist and a handful of samples that were collected by Rerich's son. So it was a successful botanical expedition, despite the fact that it was a disaster diplomatically. They managed to bring back many species which have now become naturalized in the Great Plains and have done the job of stabilizing the soil. One of those plants is actually given a Linnaean name after Rurich, one of these drought-resistant grasses.
Great. Thank you so much, Felix. So with that, we're going to conclude the presentation and open the floor for any questions, both in person and online. I'll stop sharing the presentation so we can see everyone. Zoom. Perfect. So yes, please, if there is any questions and I'll pass around the book so everyone can have a look.
You have first. The most eager. All right, questions. Yes, please.
Is there thing about the canons in the book? Also the book about the myths and legends and things about the canons.
No, we didn't. We studied the annals closely for this exhibition, but the only space that it comes across is when Lahuti is recounting a fictional account of running away from Iran, and he ends up going through the Qanot system to go across the Aras River. So we didn't want to centralize it, although in the exhibition, the Obamor and the Qanot are two major features. You will see it both in the book and in the images that we were showing earlier, but it's not a central like architectural element of the book.
Underground passages.
Underground water passages. The Obamor as the water storage was a form that we worked with in the exhibition, but in the stories and for the sake of the narratives in the book, it only appears as a canal for flights, like to flee the crisis.
So what is the overarching design of the book that links this multimedia project together, from highly focused documents to cartoons to spaces?
What we were interested in, and Felix, you can elaborate on this after me, but what we were really interested in alongside the process of making the book was to remain eclectic enough that all of these archives and documents and histories can coexist. And that's why we refer to ourselves and all the authors as unreliable narrators in that sense too, that we present a series of stories that can be interpreted in different ways. So the book, whether you started in the middle, at the back, or in the beginning, you're going to have a different experience of that narrative. So we wanted to almost function as an object, like an art exhibition. You would go into it and fall within the holes that are in the book, and come across one story, and then fall within that fissure and come out somewhere else with some kind of relevance. Of course, the idea of autobiographies that are attributed to different people was very central to how the character development functions. And for us, it was also interesting to reproduce some of these archives and allow the kind of narratives of water tension from Zabul and the kind of 4,000-year water tension and conflict that we see all the way to today at the border regions of Iran and Afghanistan to coexist with the story of Rorik, for example, in the archives, and see how in this rhizomatic way it can be interpreted. Felix, do you have anything to add onto that?
I mean, I would say the overarching theme is the overcast. It's water. It's all of these encounters with water, archival, spectral, mythological, incidental. I mean, Rouzbeh didn't mention, but in this forgotten chapter of Lahuti's real autobiography, which was created by Dina, he's writing a social realist reflection of a Soviet mega project of creating an artificial glacier and water storage. So all of the characters in some way encounter or are adjacent to conflicts and constellations over water. In the exhibition itself, we wanted people to, I mean, as Rouzbeh was mentioning before, the Chaykhana as this place where gossip is overheard, but always in snippets. Like if you sit in the tea house and you can overhear snippets of people's of gossip and information traveling, and to create a unstable narrative out of that. So in the exhibition, there was a lot of material, and it wasn't expected that anyone would be able to absorb all of the information at once, but that every person would go in and contact different aspects of it in a different logic and create their own, let's say, meta narrative.
So narrative. Hydro narrative, sort of water.
A hydro narrative. Yeah. A hydro narrative. Yes, for it to flow like the river, which floods, which takes wayward courses, which sometimes stops for a while in a little lake and then moves on, breaks off, gathers new stories along the way.
Thank you so much for your fantastic presentation. You just talked about water, and actually I feel like it's not about the water, but the lack of water. The thirst has been the overarching theme of your project. Have you given any particular thoughts about how this kind of idea of thirst has maybe changed over time, or do you think it's kind of just a given part of life, or does it contain message of God, or in the end we approach it, I mean the United States approach it with the colonial and scientific ways to kind of to make up for their domestic lack of water, right? So I wonder whether there's had kind of political, artistic meaning. One of my this idea kind of came from the novelist Mahmoud Duradobadi. He wrote the novel Thirst, right? Where the thirst kind of worked as a kind of equalizer between soldiers of Iran and Iraq during the war. So I was wondering whether you've given any particular thoughts on this.
That's super interesting. We didn't know about that particular reference, so thank you so much. We're going to look into that. But I would say we thought about thirst a lot as the absence of water, and that's why when we tried to frame the entire book, we wrote about it as a liminal space between threats and post-disaster solution. The threats being thirst, the kind of absence of water is always looming over the entire the narratives that we explore, and then the post-disaster solution, the Nushdaru pas az mag Sohrab, is how do you go about fixing that threat? So we thought about it. So this kind of absence and presence of water is important. And the poem that we heard in the beginning is very much about this protracted water conflict, the slow violence of, environmental changes and droughts. What do you think, Felix? Thirst.
So thirsty.
I don't know if my
Why-
signal, it's saying it's saying I'm a bit, my bandwidth is low, but can you hear me properly?
Yes. You're thirsty for internet.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's funny. I recalled one of the first things me and Rouzbeh talked about when we were putting the exhibition together or through the research. I forget even where we encountered this, where it was in a poem about water. What is the one word which is not mentioned? And it's water. So it was everything around that, and also for us, thirst. I mean, is there's a spiritual dimension to our work and to all the works in the exhibition, because not only were they, lacking in physical resources, they were lacking in spiritual ones, and they were thirsting for new visions of how to live and how to organize in times of crises. So that is something that in all of the characters in the work, the people are in a place of resource crisis, but also spiritual crisis. And in this thirsting, this is where they imagine totally new visions of what can be. So that's why, this is the Rarich story is so fascinating, because you would think, I mean, until recently, how could the president be, taken by this madman, who had this totally megalomaniac project for the world, and it's because people were, I mean, of course, that was always the case. The mask has just fallen, but it's always been there, of course. But this is what's nice about for us about going to history and going to the archive, is because we have that critical distance to be able to look at history as a teacher and history as an analogy for the present, and it helps us read our present moment. The crisis of the Dust Bowl has a lot of the seeds of where we are now, as did the Sheikh Soute, right? So like there is this rhyming throughout history of thirst, of crisis.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk, and also I'm looking forward to see your book and read your book. And I wanted to ask you, how many exhibitions did you have in regard to the book and the project that you have?
This project, we only had one exhibition, as all the pieces together, but we're always looking for like opportunities to show different parts of the exhibition. Some sculptures and installations in that exhibit were too large, they had to be dismantled, but some of them are now in the collections of other museums. So hopefully they're going to show it sometimes in the near future.
Was it in Europe or?
It was in Hasselt in Belgium.
In Belgium. So I think because the Europe has a more understanding of the global warming and the scarcity of the water, I wanted to see like how was their reaction to the exhibitions, and how did you address these exhibitions in your proposal?
That's a really good question and a challenge that we had during the exhibition. It was on for around 3.5 months, but we were only there in person to see the audiences in the beginning and another occasion in the middle. And I don't think it was the exhibition wasn't as accessible to the locals, because the stories seem to be quite far off from the geography that everyone is used to. Of course, there was the replication of the chaikhana, the architecture there, that people could sit and read different aspects of the story. But altogether, it is quite distant geography after all, from people who are living in Hasselt and the Flanders in general. What was interesting for us, I was just going to say, because of the water tensions between the Netherlands and Belgium as well, there was a lot of interest in water. conversations around water and water tension. But yeah, I'm not sure how much of that discussion we were able to open for the audience. What do you think, Felix?
I mean, Belgium is I think the most water stressed country in Europe. So there was a lot of resonance with that. Also, as we were working on the exhibition, we found out that the river which used to flow through Hasselt was buried, and it passed underneath where the museum is now. So water was always only a few feet below us, so to speak. So I think that there was a lot of resonance. We also worked very closely with the docents of the museum to act as storytellers, because for us the the main point of the exhibition is to tell stories, and to rely on a tradition of storytelling, which and its potential to kind of relay, complex socioeconomic concepts through these traditions. So the docents were trained on the works, but they also had their own favorites, and they had their own ways of retelling it. So even in the retelling, the story started fragmenting and taking on new forms of fiction. So for us, the storytelling was one of the most important aspects of that. And through that, I think all kinds of works, regardless of cultural context, can be made accessible and legible to people.
Especially when they're dealing with elements like water, that is so planetary.
Yes. Very universal.
I mean, yeah, like the slogan that was repeated throughout the exhibition, "Ob Hayat Ast," right? Water is life. It pertains to all of us.
Yes, just kind of following up on maybe more of Felix's previous comments. So it's a beautiful work. I'm looking forward to seeing the book. And yeah, I love the kind of multivocal, transnational, and historical narratives you bring in, but they also have all these very relevant contemporary kind of resonances. And I wonder if the contemporary world makes it into the book. Like, so do you end with archives, or I was struck by, what was his name? For bringing back these plants that are now planted and existing. So do those contemporary traces make it into the book or the exhibit, or are you just kind of, is that the speculative part that we're left with?
We do make one gesture towards the contemporary that is very relevant, because it's a Telegram bot that only exists in the book as a QR code, so you can download it through Telegram by Sesha Shostakova and basically it's a propaganda making machine. So that's how we're kind of trying to situate the conflict and the tensions around access to water to like the tensions for access to the historical record and understanding narrativization of land and conflict. So that's
so the Telegram, oh sorry to interrupt. The Telegram channel, it's based on these private chat rooms that various let's say low-level agents of the Russia propaganda machine and troll machine go online and kind of talk shop about different ways that they are creating fictions online. And they both are researchers and artists as well. And based on these chats, which they spend quite a lot of time researching, reading, following, they created, let's say, like various speculative, but also some like extracted fragments from these chats. And in this Telegram chat, you can kind of engage with this bot, which mines those chats and kind of also catalogs them for you. Or not catalogs them for you, but like you get to engage with this kind of chat room.
Thank you. We have a question from Professor Tabandoi. Please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, Ibrahim Gulistan has got a famous book, Juy Divar و Tishne, based upon one of the poems by Rumi, which begins with بر لب جو بود دیواری بلند بر لب دیوار تشنه دردمند. I mean, the story is about actually a brook, about the wall beside the brook, and somebody who is thirsty and wants to get to water. I mean, is attempting to find water. And the Rumi begins, I mean, his poem, بر لب جو بود دیواری تشنه در لب جو بود دیواری بلند بر لب دیوار تشنه دردمند. And the story ends with the fact that آب کم جو تشنگی آور به دست تا بجوید آبت از بالا و پست. Try to find thirst rather than water. The significant, I mean, and what it's very important. I mean, the message that Rumi tells us. I wanted to know whether, I mean, the reflection of this significant point by Rumi is mentioned in the book or suggested somehow or not.
It is not, but this is
Second edition.
yes, exactly. I can promise you it will show up in our work. So thank you so much for this brilliant poem.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I mean, Rumi is always a big influence for us, as well as Khayyam. So much obliged. Thank you.
Please.
Any other questions here online? If not,
Thank you so much.